I was sitting in my living room that Saturday afternoon, December 20th, with a cup of chamomile tea cooling on the glass coffee table beside me. The winter light filtered through the tall windows of my Greenwich home, casting long shadows across the Persian rug Richard and I had bought in Istanbul 20 years ago. I remember thinking how quiet the house felt. Peaceful. The kind of silence I'd grown to appreciate in the 8 years since my husband passed. Sophia had arrived about an hour earlier, my 15-year-old granddaughter with her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail and those bright blue eyes that reminded me so much of Richard. She'd texted me that morning, asking if she could come over to look for Christmas decorations in the attic. Of course, I'd said yes. I always said yes to Sophia. She was the one bright spot in an otherwise complicated family dynamic. "Grandma, I'm going up to the attic now," she'd called out before disappearing up the stairs. I'd heard her footsteps overhead, the creak of the attic door, the sound of boxes being moved around. Normal sounds, familiar sounds, nothing that would have prepared me for what came next. I was reading an article on my tablet about new trends in sustainable interior design when I heard it. Footsteps. But not the leisurely pace of someone browsing through old Christmas ornaments. These were quick, urgent, almost running. I looked up just as Sophia appeared at the bottom of the staircase. My heart stopped. She was white as a sheet. Actually white. I'd heard that expression my entire life, but I'd never truly seen it until that moment. Her face had lost every ounce of color, and there was a sheen of cold sweat across her forehead. Her hands were shaking as she clutched a brown leather folder against her chest. The same folder I kept important documents in. The one I'd hidden in the attic behind old storage boxes 3 weeks ago. "Grandma." Her voice came out thin and strained. "Grandma, you need to get your documents. Right now. We need to leave. We need to leave right now." I stood up so fast my tea nearly spilled. "Sophia, what's wrong? What happened up there?" She shook her head rapidly, glancing toward the front door like she expected someone to burst through it at any second. "Please, just trust me. Get your purse, your wallet, your ID, anything important. We don't have much time." "Sweetheart, you're scaring me. What did you find?" "Grandma, please." Her voice cracked, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. Sophia never cried. Not when she fell off her bike at 7 and broke her wrist. Not when her first boyfriend broke up with her last year. This girl was made of steel, just like I'd been at her age. But right now, she was terrified. I grabbed my purse from the side table, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind raced through possibilities. A gas leak? A structural problem? Something dangerous in the attic? But none of those explanations matched the look on her face. This wasn't fear of physical danger. This was something else entirely. "Sophia, talk to me. What's in that folder?" She looked at me with those blue eyes, now filled with something I couldn't quite place. Betrayal? Horror? "Grandma, you can't open the door for anyone. Do you understand? No matter who it is, no matter what they say, you cannot open that door." A chill ran down my spine. Who would be coming to the door? Before she could answer, we both heard it. The sound of a car pulling into my circular driveway. The crunch of gravel under tires. Sophia's face went even paler if that was possible. "Oh God, they're here already," she whispered. "Grandma, please, you have to listen to me. Don't open the door. Please don't open the door." I moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. My daughter's silver Lexus was parked in front of my house. Claire stepped out from the driver's side, and Dennis emerged from the passenger seat. My daughter was wearing the cream-colored coat I'd bought her for her birthday last month. Dennis had on that gray suit he always wore, the one that made him look like every other corporate salesman in Connecticut. "It's just your mother and Dennis," I said, turning back to Sophia. "Sweetheart, why would I not let them in?" "Because of this." She thrust the folder at me with trembling hands. "I found it hidden in the attic, behind the boxes where you told me the decorations were." It was in a plastic bin marked Tax Records 2019, but when I opened it, this was inside. I took the folder, my own hands beginning to shake now. Through my front window, I could see Claire and Dennis walking toward my door. They weren't rushing. Their pace was casual, normal. Dennis had his hand on the small of Claire's back, guiding her up the stone pathway. "Grandma, open it. Please, just open it and look." I flipped open the folder. The first document I saw had my signature at the bottom, or what looked like my signature. It was a power of attorney form, dated 2 weeks ago, granting Claire full access to all my financial accounts, my properties, my business. I stared at it, confused, because I'd never signed such a document. "I didn't sign this," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Keep looking," Sophia whispered urgently. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. I flipped to the next page. It was a letter on official medical letterhead from Dr. Frederick Paulson, a psychiatrist I'd never heard of. The letter was addressed to Fairview Psychiatric Hospital, recommending my immediate admission for treatment of severe dementia and delusional behavior. According to this letter, I'd been exhibiting signs of paranoia, memory loss, and aggressive outbursts that made me a danger to myself and others. The doorbell rang again, longer this time. "Mom? Mom, are you home?" Claire's voice filtered through the heavy oak door, sweet and concerned. We saw Sophia's bike outside. We wanted to stop by and say hello. My hands were shaking so badly now I could barely hold the papers. I flipped to the next document. Bank transfer forms, all filled out, all requiring just my signature. $2.8 million, the exact amount I'd put into Sophia's trust fund 3 weeks ago, the trust fund that Claire wasn't supposed to know about yet. "Oh my God," I breathed. "There's more," Sophia said, her voice barely audible. She reached over and turned to the last few pages. They were printed emails between Claire and Dennis. The most recent one was from yesterday. "D, we can't wait any longer. The gambling debts are at $180K now, and Tony says if we don't pay by January 1st, he's going to the police. My mother changed her will again. I saw the paperwork on her desk last week. She's giving almost everything to Sophia in that damn trust fund. If we don't act now, we'll get nothing. The fake medical records are ready. The psychiatrist you paid off will sign anything. We just need to get her signature on the POA, or if she won't sign, we proceed with Plan B. Saturday, December 20th. That's when we do this. We'll tell Sophia we're taking her Christmas shopping. She'll be out of the house. It'll just be us and my mother. One way or another, by the end of the day, we'll have access to those accounts." The doorbell rang a third time, followed by heavy knocking. "Evelyn? Evelyn, we know you're in there. We can hear the TV." That was Dennis now. His voice was deeper, more authoritative. There was no warmth in it. I looked at Sophia, really looked at her. This brave, brilliant girl who'd gone searching for Christmas decorations and instead found evidence that her own parents were planning to rob her grandmother, to institutionalize me, to steal everything Richard and I had built over 30 years. "How did you know to look in that specific box?" I asked quietly. Sophia's jaw tightened. "I heard them talking last night. I wasn't supposed to be home. I was supposed to be at Emma's sleepover, but I felt sick and came home early. They were in Dad's office with the door almost closed. Mom was crying. Dad was telling her that everything was hidden in the attic in a box marked tax records where you'd never think to look. He said once they got your signature today or got you dealt with some other way, they'd destroy all the evidence." The knocking got louder, more insistent. "Mom! Mom, open the door! This isn't funny!" Claire's voice had an edge to it now. The sweetness was gone, replaced by something harder. "Evelyn, we need to talk about some concerning behavior we've noticed lately," Dennis called out. "We've spoken to Dr. Paulson. He's very worried about you. We all are. Just open the door so we can have a civilized conversation." Dr. Paulson, the psychiatrist who'd written that fake evaluation. They were already building their narrative, already setting the stage to paint me as mentally incompetent. I looked down at the papers in my hands. My daughter, my own daughter, The little girl I'd held in the hospital 32 years ago, with her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. The child I'd worked 70-hour weeks to provide for, to give every opportunity, every advantage. She was outside my door right now, planning to destroy me. "Grandma, what do we do?" Sophia's voice pulled me back to the present moment. I took a deep breath, forcing my mind to work through the shock and betrayal. I'd built a $4.2 million business from nothing. I'd survived my husband's sudden death and kept the company not just afloat, but thriving. I'd negotiated with suppliers, investors, difficult clients. I was Evelyn Hartwell, and I didn't fall apart in a crisis. "My phone," I said, my voice steadier now. "Where's my phone?" Sophia pointed to the coffee table where I'd left it next to my tea. I grabbed it and pulled up my contacts, scrolling to Richard Chen, my attorney. He'd been Richard's attorney too, back when my husband was alive. He knew everything about my estate, my business, my family dynamics. If anyone would know what to do, it was him. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Evelyn? This is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Richard, I need your help. Right now, I'm at home, and I've just discovered evidence of fraud, forgery, and attempted financial exploitation. My daughter and son-in-law are outside my door as we speak." There was a pause. Then, in a much more serious tone, "Don't open that door. Don't speak to them. Are you in immediate physical danger?" "I don't think so. Not yet. But they're getting aggressive." "I'm calling the police right now. Stay on the line with me. Don't hang up." I could hear him switching to another phone, his voice becoming muffled as he spoke rapidly to someone else. Meanwhile, the knocking continued. Evelyn, this is ridiculous." Dennis's voice was angry now. All pretense of concern had evaporated. "We drove all the way over here. The least you can do is open the damn door." "Mom, please!" Claire was crying now. I could hear it in her voice. "I just want to talk to you. Please don't shut me out like this. Please, Mom. I'm your daughter." Those words hit me like a physical blow. My daughter. Yes, she was. And she was outside my door with forged documents and a plan to have me locked away in a psychiatric facility. Sophia squeezed my free hand. I looked down at her, this 15-year-old girl who just saved me from financial ruin and possibly worse. Her face was still pale, but there was determination in her eyes now. She'd made her choice. She'd chosen to protect me. She'd chosen to do the right thing, even when it meant betraying her own parents. "The police are on their way," Richard Chen's voice came back on the line. 5 minutes, maybe less. Greenwich PD is taking this very seriously given the dollar amounts involved. I'm getting in my car now. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Evelyn, do not open that door under any circumstances. Do you understand? I understand. Good. Now, tell me exactly what evidence you have. I began describing the documents while Sophia stood beside me, her hand still gripping mine. Outside, Dennis and Claire continued their assault on my door. The knocking had turned to pounding. Dennis was shouting something about his rights as family, about how I couldn't keep them out, about how they'd call an ambulance if they had to. "They're threatening to call an ambulance," I told Richard. "Let them. The police will be there first, and when they arrive, they're going to have some very interesting questions about those forged documents. Evelyn, you're doing the right thing. I know this is hard. I know it's your daughter. But what they're attempting is serious criminal activity." Criminal activity. My daughter was a criminal. My son-in-law was a criminal. And I was the target. I walked to the window again, careful to stay back from view. Claire was crying openly now, mascara running down her face. Dennis had his phone out, gesturing angrily as he spoke into it. In the distance, I could hear sirens. They could hear them too. I watched as Dennis's head snapped up, his expression changing from anger to something like panic. He grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her toward their car. But it was too late. A police cruiser was already turning onto my street, lights flashing. "The police are here," I told Richard. "Good. I'm 10 minutes away. Don't go outside yet. Let the officers come to you. And Evelyn, you're going to get through this. You're one of the strongest women I know. I watched through my window as 2 police officers got out of their vehicle. Dennis and Claire had frozen on my walkway, trapped between my front door and the arriving police car. Claire looked terrified. Dennis looked cornered, dangerous. One of the officers approached them while the other came toward my door. There was a firm, professional knock. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Officer Martinez with Greenwich Police Department. Your attorney called us. Are you safe?" I looked at Sophia one more time. She nodded at me. Together, we walked to the door. I unlocked it and opened it slowly, keeping the chain on. A young officer with kind eyes looked back at me. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand you have evidence of fraud and forgery. We'd like to take your statement and examine that evidence. May we come in?" Behind him, I could see Claire. Our eyes met across the distance of my front yard. My daughter, my betrayer. The woman who'd planned to steal my life from me. She opened her mouth, maybe to say something, maybe to scream, but no sound came out. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, while Dennis argued with the other officer, his voice rising in indignation. I slid the chain off and opened the door fully. "Yes, officer," I said. "Please come in. I have quite a bit to show you." As I sat in my living room with 2 police officers and watched my daughter being questioned on my front lawn, I felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. This couldn't be my life. This couldn't be my Claire. But it was, and I needed to understand how we'd gotten here. Officer Martinez had asked me to start from the beginning, so I did. I told him about Richard, my husband of 28 years, who died 8 years ago from a sudden heart attack at 58. We'd built everything together, starting with a tiny interior design shop in Stamford back in 1992. Richard handled the business side while I worked with clients. By 2005, we had 3 locations and annual revenues over $2 million. We worked constantly, I told Officer Martinez, aware that Sophia was sitting beside me, listening to parts of her family history she'd probably never heard. 70, 80-hour weeks were normal for us. We sent Claire to the best schools, Choate Rosemary Hall for high school, then Vassar for college. She had everything we didn't have growing up. But we weren't there. Not really. Not in the ways that probably mattered most to a child. Richard and I had justified it back then. We were building security, building a future, building generational wealth so Claire would never struggle the way we had. My parents had been working-class people in Queens. Richard's family had immigrated from Taiwan with almost nothing. We'd clawed our way into the life we wanted, and we'd assumed Claire would understand, would appreciate the sacrifice. She resented us for it, I continued, my voice catching slightly. I didn't see it clearly until years later, but she did. All through high school, all through college. She saw other kids whose parents came to every game, every recital. We came when we could, but we missed more than we attended. Officer Martinez nodded, taking notes. He was younger than Claire, maybe late 20s, with kind eyes that reminded me a little of Richard. When did she meet her husband? Dennis Thornton. She met him her senior year at Vassar. He was getting his MBA at Columbia, came to some career networking event she attended. He was charming, I'll give him that. Good-looking, well-spoken, ambitious. Everything I thought I should want for my daughter. I glanced toward the window where I could see Dennis being handcuffed. That same man who'd sat at my Thanksgiving table for 13 years. They'd gotten married quickly, too quickly in my opinion. Claire was 23, Dennis was 26. Richard and I paid for an elaborate wedding at the Greenwich Country Club. $40,000 for one day. I remember thinking it was excessive, but Claire had been so excited and I'd wanted to give her something special. Something that showed her we cared, even if we hadn't always been present. Sophia was born a year later, I said, looking at my granddaughter. She gave me a small, sad smile. Best day of my life, watching that baby come into the world. I promised myself I'd be different with her. I'd be the grandmother who showed up, who was present, who made time. And I was. It was true. After Richard died, I'd scaled back my involvement in the business. I'd hired a general manager to handle day-to-day operations. I still owned everything, still made the big decisions, but I'd created space in my life. Space for Sophia. We'd have lunch dates, shopping trips, movie nights. She'd spend weekends at my house, and we'd bake cookies or work in my garden or just sit and talk about everything and nothing. I think that made Claire angry too, I admitted. She'd make comments about how I had time for Sophia that I never had for her. And she was right. I did. But I couldn't go back and change the past. I could only try to do better with my granddaughter. The problems had started to become obvious about 3 years ago. Claire had always been a little scattered with money. She'd had a trust fund from Richard and me, $200,000 that she got access to when she turned 30. It was gone within 18 months. She said she'd invested it in a friend's startup that went under. I'd believed her. Then there were the constant requests for loans, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, always with reasonable explanations, car repairs, medical bills not covered by insurance, home renovations. I'd given her over $70,000 in the last 3 years, none of which had ever been paid back. I'd stopped giving around 6 months ago, and that's when things got really tense between us. She started coming to visit me more often, which should have been nice, I told Officer Martinez. But it never felt right. She'd steer conversations toward my finances, ask about my retirement plans, my will, whether I'd considered giving her power of attorney just in case. She was only 32 years old, asking me these questions like I was ancient and incompetent. Dennis had started joining these visits about 4 months ago. He'd sit in my living room, that polished salesman smile on his face, talking about financial planning and estate management. He'd brought brochures from companies that handled elder care, even though I was 56 and in perfect health. He'd suggested I consider a conservatorship arrangement where Claire could help manage my assets. I should have seen it then, I said, feeling the weight of my own blindness. I should have understood what they were planning, but I didn't want to believe my own daughter could be capable of something like this. Officer Martinez looked up from his notepad. When did you change your will? 3 weeks ago, November 29th. I remembered the date exactly because it had been Richard's birthday. He would have been 66. I'd gone to Richard Chen's office that morning and made the changes. $2.8 million into an irrevocable trust for Sophia, accessible when she turned 25. The house and my remaining assets would still go to Claire, but the trust was untouchable. I didn't tell Claire about the trust, I continued. Richard Chen advised me not to until after my death, but somehow she found out. I keep some paperwork in my home office, and I think she went through my desk when I wasn't looking. About a week after I made the changes, I noticed documents had been moved. Papers I'd left in one order were in a different order. That had been the first real warning sign, the moment when my maternal instinct to give Claire the benefit of the doubt started cracking. I'd installed a small security camera in my office after that, hidden in a bookshelf. I hadn't checked the footage yet. Now I wished I had. 2 months ago, my bank called me, I said. Someone had tried to access my accounts using old passwords. The bank's security system flagged it as suspicious and locked everything down. They asked if it was me. It wasn't. I told them to keep the accounts locked with enhanced security. I changed all my passwords to things no one in my family would know. I'd suspected it was Claire. I'd even confronted her, asked her point blank if she'd tried to access my accounts. She'd cried, told me I was being paranoid, said she was hurt that I'd even suggest such a thing. I'd backed down. God help me, I'd backed down because she was my daughter, and I'd wanted to believe her. The therapy was a lie, too, I added. I'd been paying for Claire to see a therapist. $200 a session, twice a week. I thought she was going. She told me it was helping her deal with stress and anxiety, but I called the therapist's office last month to pay the bill, and they told me Claire hadn't been there in 3 months. She'd been cashing the checks I gave her for copays, but she wasn't going to therapy at all. Sophia shifted beside me. "Grandma, there's something I need to tell you. About Mom." I turned to look at her. Officer Martinez did too. "I found some papers in Mom's bathroom a few months ago," Sophia said quietly. "From some website called Premium Stakes. I looked it up later. It's an online gambling site. The papers had her username on them. I didn't tell you because I thought maybe Dad knew and it was their business, you know? But now, online gambling, the missing money, the desperate requests for loans, the lies about therapy. It all made a terrible kind of sense." "How much does she owe?" Officer Martinez asked Sophia. "The email I saw said $180,000, my granddaughter answered. "There was something about paying by January 1st, or they'd report her to authorities. I don't really understand how it all works, but she seemed really scared of this person named Tony. $180,000 in gambling debts. My daughter was in deep, desperate trouble, and instead of coming to me for help, she decided to rob me, to destroy me, to have me declared mentally incompetent and locked away so she could steal everything Richard and I had built." I looked at Officer Martinez. "I need you to understand something. I would have helped her. If she'd come to me and told me the truth, admitted she had a problem, asked for help, I would have helped her. I would have paid off the debts. I would have gotten her into treatment. She's my daughter. But this—" I gestured toward the folder of forged documents on my coffee table. "This is something I can't forgive. This is criminal." The officer nodded. "Mrs. Hartwell, we're going to need to take all of this as evidence. The documents, any correspondence you have, security footage if you have it. This is a serious case. Forgery, fraud, attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person." "I'm not elderly," I said automatically, then almost laughed at the absurdity of correcting him at a time like this. "I'm 56. Legally, for these purposes, anyone over 55 qualifies," he explained gently, "which actually makes this a more serious crime. Your daughter and son-in-law are looking at felony charges." Through the window, I watched as the second officer walked Claire to the police car. She was still crying, her whole body shaking. Part of me, the mother part that had held her as a baby and kissed her scraped knees and braided her hair for school, wanted to run out there and hold her. Tell her it would be okay. Fix it somehow. But the stronger part of me, the part that Richard had helped build over 30 years of business and partnership, knew that some things couldn't be fixed. Shouldn't be fixed. Claire had made her choices. She'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Sophia took my hand again. I squeezed it tightly, so grateful for this brave girl who'd saved me. Who'd had the courage to look in that folder and understand immediately what it meant. Who'd chosen to protect me, even though it meant betraying her own parents. "What happens now?" I asked Officer Martinez. "Now," he said, "we take them to the station. They'll be processed, arraigned, and held pending bail. Your attorney should meet us there. You'll need to give a full statement. And we'll need Sophia's statement as well about what she found and when. This is going to be a long process, Mrs. Hartwell. Are you prepared for that?" Was I prepared to watch my daughter face criminal charges? Was I prepared to testify against her in court? Was I prepared for my family to be torn apart permanently and publicly? No, but I'd do it anyway. Because the alternative was letting her destroy me, and I hadn't survived Richard's death and built a multi-million-dollar business just to let my own daughter steal it all away. "I'm prepared," I said. "Let's do whatever needs to be done." The next 3 hours were a blur of police stations, statements, and the slow, grinding machinery of justice. Richard Chen arrived at the Greenwich Police Department 20 minutes after Sophia and I did, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing the same serious expression he'd had when he'd helped Richard and me navigate complex business negotiations years ago. "Evelyn, Sophia." He nodded to us both, then turned to the detective who'd taken over the case from Officer Martinez. "I'm Richard Chen, Mrs. Hartwell's attorney. I'll need a few minutes with my clients before any formal statements are taken." They put us in a small conference room, with gray walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Richard Chen sat across from us and opened his briefcase, pulling out a legal pad and pen. "First things first," he said, looking directly at me. "How are you holding up?" It was such a simple question, but it broke something inside me. I'd been holding myself together through sheer force of will for the last 3 hours, but sitting in that sterile room with Richard's attorney asking me how I was, I felt tears starting to form. "I'm angry," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm so angry I can barely think straight. My daughter tried to rob me, Richard. She was going to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. She forged my signature. She created fake medical records. How do I process that? How do I accept that my own child could do something like this?" Richard Chen let me speak without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Those are completely normal reactions. What Claire and Dennis attempted is called undue influence and financial exploitation. It's more common than you'd think, unfortunately. Adult children targeting aging parents' assets. But in this case, the evidence is unusually clear, and the intent was particularly malicious." "What will happen to them?" Sophia asked quietly. My granddaughter looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there this morning. "That depends on several factors," Richard said. "The forged documents alone are serious. The fake medical evaluation is fraud. The attempted financial exploitation carries significant penalties. If the prosecutor's office pursues this aggressively, and given the dollar amounts involved, they probably will, your mother and stepfather could be looking at 5 to 10 years in prison." 5 to 10 years. I tried to imagine Claire in prison, wearing an orange jumpsuit, sleeping in a cell. My daughter. My baby girl. "Mrs. Hartwell," Richard continued gently, "I need you to understand something. This decision isn't entirely in your hands. Once we turned over that evidence to the police, the state became involved. Even if you wanted to drop charges, which I strongly advise against, the prosecutor could still move forward. This is a criminal matter now, not a family dispute." I nodded, wiping my eyes. "I understand. And I don't want to drop charges. What they did was wrong. It was criminal. If I let them get away with this, they'll just try again, or they'll do it to someone else." "That's the right way to think about it," Richard said. "Now, let's talk about what comes next. You'll both need to give detailed statements. Sophia, they'll probably ask you to describe exactly what you found, where you found it, and what made you look in that specific location. Evelyn, they'll want to know about your relationship with Claire and Dennis, any suspicious behavior you noticed, financial transactions, everything." We spent the next 45 minutes going through our statements with Richard before the detectives came in. There were 2 of them. Detective Sarah Morrison, a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, and Detective James Park, younger and quieter, but with sharp, observant eyes. They recorded everything. I told them about the missing money, the failed therapy sessions, the suspicious attempts to access my bank accounts. I told them about Dennis's increasingly aggressive suggestions about power of attorney and conservatorship. I showed them texts from Claire asking for loans, emails about financial problems. Sophia told them about the hidden folder in the attic, about the conversation she'd overheard the night before, about her parents' increasingly strange behavior over the past few months. She told them about times when Dennis had been controlling or intimidating, moments when Claire had seemed desperate and afraid. Detective Morrison listened to everything, taking notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When we finished, she sat back and looked at both of us with something like sympathy. "Mrs. Hartwell, I've been working financial crimes for 12 years. This is one of the clearer cases I've seen. The evidence you've provided, combined with the forged documents, gives us a very strong case. Your daughter and son-in-law are going to face serious consequences." "Have they said anything?" I asked. "Claire and Dennis, have they given statements?" Detective Morrison exchanged a glance with her partner. "Dennis Thornton has invoked his right to an attorney and isn't talking. Your daughter, however, has been very vocal." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. What do you mean? She's claimed that you're the one who's mentally unstable, Detective Park said quietly. She's told us that you've been exhibiting signs of dementia, that you've been paranoid and delusional, that she and her husband were only trying to help you. She says the medical evaluation from Dr. Paulson is legitimate and that you need psychiatric care. I felt like I'd been slapped. That's a lie, all of it. I've never even met Dr. Paulson. He's a psychiatrist, Dennis found, and paid off to write fake evaluations. We know, Detective Morrison said quickly. We've already contacted Dr. Paulson. He's currently claiming he doesn't know what we're talking about, but his name is on official letterhead recommending your involuntary commitment. We're getting a warrant for his records and communications. If Dennis paid him to create fraudulent medical documents, Dr. Paulson is looking at his own criminal charges and the loss of his medical license. Richard Chen leaned forward. Detective, what's the timeline here? When will charges be formally filed? The prosecutor's office will review everything over the weekend, Detective Morrison said. Arraignment will probably be Monday morning. Given the severity of the charges and the evidence, I expect bail will be set high. These are flight risk defendants with clear motive to flee or tamper with evidence. What about Sophia's safety? I asked suddenly, the thought hitting me like a freight train. If they make bail, what's to stop them from trying to intimidate her or hurt her? She's the key witness. She found the evidence. Detective Morrison's expression turned serious. That's a valid concern. We can request a protective order as part of the bail conditions. No contact with you or Sophia. But Mrs. Hartwell, I need to be straight with you. If they make bail, they'll likely try to contact Sophia. She's their daughter, and they'll want to explain, justify, manipulate. You need to be prepared for that. Sophia's hand found mine under the table and squeezed tight. I squeezed back, trying to project a confidence I didn't entirely feel. We left the police station around 7 that evening. The December sky was already dark, and Christmas lights twinkled on houses we passed as I drove Sophia back to my home in Greenwich. Neither of us spoke for the first 10 minutes of the drive. The silence felt heavy, loaded with everything that had happened and everything still to come. Grandma? Sophia finally said, her voice small in the darkness of the car. Yes, sweetheart? Are you going to hate me? For turning in my parents? I nearly swerved off the road. I pulled into a parking lot off the post road and turned to face my granddaughter. In the glow of the dashboard lights, she looked so young, so scared. Sophia Grace Thornton, you listen to me. You did not turn in your parents. Your parents committed crimes. You discovered evidence of those crimes and did the right thing by reporting them. You saved me. Do you understand that? You saved your grandmother from being drugged, kidnapped, and locked in a psychiatric facility where I could have been held for weeks or months while they drained my accounts and sold my properties. Tears were streaming down her face now. But they're my parents. I'm supposed to love them. I'm supposed to protect them. No, baby. Children are supposed to love their parents, yes, but parents are supposed to protect their children, not the other way around. And when parents become dangerous, when they become criminals, you don't owe them your silence. You don't owe them complicity in their crimes. She sobbed, and I unbuckled both our seatbelts so I could pull her across the console and into my arms. She cried against my shoulder, her whole body shaking, while I held her and stroked her hair and told her over and over that she was brave, she was good, she did the right thing. When we finally got back to my house, I made us soup and grilled cheese sandwiches, comfort food from her childhood. We ate in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd taught her to bake cookies when she was 6, where we'd had countless breakfasts and dinners over the years. You'll stay here, I told her. For as long as you need. Your room is still your room. We'll get your things from your parents' house, but not tonight. Tonight we just rest. But resting proved impossible. My phone started ringing around 9. The first call was from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a reporter from the Greenwich Time asking for comment about my daughter's arrest. I deleted it immediately. The second call was from my sister Margaret in Boston. She'd somehow already heard about what happened. Small-town networks move fast, even in wealthy Connecticut suburbs. "Evelyn, oh my God, I just heard from Linda Morrison, whose husband is on the police force. Is it true? Did Claire really try to rob you?" I gave her a brief version of events while Sophia sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, pretending not to listen. Margaret was appropriately horrified, appropriately supportive, but I could hear the underlying current of gossip in her voice. This would be all over Greenwich by tomorrow. All over the country club, the charity boards, the social circles where I'd built my reputation over 30 years. The third call came at 10:30, just as I was getting ready for bed. It was from Fairview Psychiatric Hospital. A woman with a professional clinical voice asked for Evelyn Hartwell. This is she. "Ms. Hartwell, this is Nurse Patterson from Fairview. We have you scheduled for admission tomorrow, December 21st at 9 a.m. I'm calling to confirm your arrival time and go over admission procedures." My blood ran cold. "I'm not scheduled for admission. I've never contacted your facility." There was a pause. "I'm showing paperwork from Dr. Frederick Paulson recommending involuntary commitment for treatment of severe dementia and paranoid delusions. Your daughter, Claire Thornton, is listed as your power of attorney and has arranged for your admission." "None of that is real," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "The power of attorney is forged. Dr. Paulson's evaluation is fraudulent. My daughter and her husband were arrested today for fraud and attempted financial exploitation. I suggest you contact the Greenwich Police Department before you do anything else." Another pause. Longer this time. I see. I'll need to escalate this to our legal department immediately. Thank you for informing us, Miss Hartwell." She hung up quickly, probably already panicking about the hospital's liability in nearly admitting someone based on forged documents. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in my hand, and felt the full weight of how close I'd come to disaster. If Sophia hadn't found those documents today, I would have been picked up tomorrow morning and taken to that facility. Once inside, getting out would have been nearly impossible while Claire and Dennis drained my accounts. I went to check on Sophia before going to sleep. She was in the guest room that had basically become her room over the years, surrounded by photos of us together and artwork she'd created. She was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep either?" I asked from the doorway. "I keep thinking about Mom," she said softly. "About how she looked when they put her in the police car. She looked so scared, Grandma. I've never seen her look like that." I sat on the edge of her bed, the way I'd done hundreds of times when she was younger and had nightmares. "I know, sweetheart. I know it's hard. She's still your mother. You're allowed to feel sad for her, even while knowing she did wrong." "Do you think she ever loved us?" Sophia asked. "Really loved us? Or were we always just means to an end?" It was a question I'd been avoiding asking myself all day. Did my daughter love me? Had she ever? Or had I always been just a bank account to her, a resource to be exploited? "I think she loved us in the way she was capable of loving," I said carefully. "But I also think she's sick, Sophia. Not the way they were trying to claim I'm sick. But addiction is real. Gambling addiction is real. And people who are desperate and addicted make terrible choices. That doesn't excuse what she did. It doesn't make it okay. But it might help explain it." Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Are you going to be okay, Grandma?" I thought about that question. Was I going to be okay? My daughter had betrayed me in the worst possible way. My family was shattered. My reputation would be dragged through public legal proceedings. But I was alive. I was free. I had my granddaughter safe beside me, and I had the resources to fight back. "Yes," I said finally. "I'm going to be okay. We're going to be okay. Together." I kissed her forehead and went back to my own room. But sleep didn't come easily. I lay in the darkness, listening to the old house settle around me, and thought about Claire as a baby. As a toddler taking her first steps, as a little girl who'd hold my hand crossing the street, as a teenager who'd roll her eyes at my advice, as a woman who'd just tried to destroy me. Somewhere in the journey from that baby to this criminal, I'd lost my daughter. Maybe I'd lost her years ago, when Richard and I chose work over presence. Maybe I'd lost her when she married Dennis. Maybe I'd lost her gradually, one bad choice and one resentment at a time. Or maybe she'd never really been mine to lose. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. I almost didn't open it, but something made me look. Mom, please, let me explain. This is all a misunderstanding. Dennis made me do it. I was scared. Please don't do this to me. Please. I'm your daughter. I love you. I stared at that message for a long time. I'm your daughter. I love you. Words she'd weaponized, words she expected would make me fold, make me forgive, make me drop everything and rescue her the way I always had. I blocked the number and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring more calls, more messages, more pressure. Tomorrow would bring attorneys and prosecutors and probably more reporters. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a long legal battle that would consume months or years of my life. But tonight, I had my home, my safety, and my granddaughter sleeping down the hall. Tonight, I had survived. And survival, I was learning, was its own form of victory. The turning point came 3 weeks later, on a gray Monday morning in January, when I walked into the courthouse convinced I knew how the day would end. I thought I was prepared. I had my statement. I had my attorney. I had my anger neatly folded around me like armor. I believed this hearing was just one more step on a straight path toward justice. I was wrong. By then, Claire and Dennis had both been formally charged. Forgery, fraud, attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person, conspiracy. The list sounded like it belonged to strangers, not to the people who had sat at my dining table every Christmas for over a decade. They had spent 12 days in county jail before their families scraped together enough for bail. The court had imposed strict conditions: no contact with me or Sophia, no access to my accounts, surrender of passports. A protective order was in place. I told myself that was enough distance, enough protection. I told myself they couldn't touch us now. Then the prosecutor called Richard and asked us to come in a day early to discuss developments. That phrase alone put a knot in my stomach. We sat in a small office overlooking the parking lot. Assistant District Attorney Melissa Grant was younger than I expected, late 30s maybe, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. She had Sophia's witness statement in front of her, along with a folder of forged documents and a stack of printed emails. Mrs. Hartwell, she began, I want to be transparent with you about where we are. This is a strong case. Your daughter and son-in-law left a very clear trail, but they're not the only ones we're looking at. I frowned. What do you mean? She slid a paper across the desk toward me. This is a copy of a bank transfer from 6 months ago. $100,000 wired from your business account to a company called Northbridge Consulting. I recognized it immediately. Yes, that was a payment to a business consultant. Dennis recommended him. Northbridge Consulting, she said calmly, does not exist. It's a shell company. The account receiving those funds belongs to an LLC registered in Nevada, controlled by Dennis Thornton. My stomach dropped. He stole from my company. Yes, we believe that's when his plan escalated, she said. He'd already drained his own resources, when he started stealing from your business and realized how easily he could access large sums. Your assets became his primary target. Beside me, Sophia shifted uncomfortably. She already knew some of this. I'd told her when the forensic accountant Richard hired started going through my records. Still, hearing it laid out so plainly by a prosecutor made it feel heavier, more permanent. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. What does this have to do with today's hearing? Ada Grant took a breath. Because your daughter has changed her strategy. Her attorney has indicated that she intends to accept a plea deal and testify against Dennis. In exchange, she'll plead guilty to lesser charges and serve a reduced sentence. She wants to position herself as a victim of his manipulation. I stared at her. A victim? She was writing the emails. She was meeting with the crooked psychiatrist. She was in this up to her neck. I agree, Grant said carefully. But from a legal standpoint, if she can convincingly frame herself as someone coerced by an abusive partner, it complicates the narrative. Juries are sympathetic to women they perceive as controlled or threatened. Sophia's voice cut through the air. He is abusive. I've seen him grab her hard enough to leave marks. I've seen him break things when he's angry. Grant nodded. Exactly. That history will work in her favor, whether we like it or not. I felt my jaw clench. So she betrays me, tries to steal everything I own, and now she's going to get mercy because her husband yelled at her? It's not that simple, Grant said. She would still be pleading guilty. She would still have a criminal record. She would still likely serve time, but significantly less than Dennis. This was not the straightforward path to justice I'd imagined. In my head, they'd both been equally guilty. They'd both go away for a long time, and I'd finally exhale. But reality was messier. What does she want from me? I asked. Grant glanced at Richard, then back at me. Her attorney requested that you meet with her, under supervision. She says she wants to apologize and explain everything. Sophia sat forward. Absolutely not. Grandma, you don't have to do that. She just wants to manipulate you again. I told defense counsel that any meeting would be entirely at your discretion, Grant said. You are under no obligation to see her or speak to her, but strategically, it may be useful for us to hear what she says. We can record the conversation. Anything she admits could strengthen our case. The thought of sitting across from Claire made my chest tighten. The last image I had of her up close was from my front lawn, her cheeks streaked with mascara as police officers led her away. Since then, she'd been reduced to paperwork and court dates and third-hand descriptions. Where would this meeting happen? I asked. In a secure interview room here in the courthouse, Grant said. She would be in handcuffs. You would never be alone with her. We would be present the entire time, and your attorney would be there as well. Sophia looked at me, eyes wide. Grandma, you don't owe her anything, not one more second of your time. I met my granddaughter's gaze. She was right. I didn't owe Claire anything, but I owed myself clarity, closure, the chance to look my daughter in the eye and see who she really was now. I'll do it, I said quietly. I want to hear what she has to say. Sophia squeezed my arm but didn't argue. She knew me well enough to know that once I'd made up my mind, there was no changing it. They led us to a different part of the building, down a hallway that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals. The interview room was small, with a metal table bolted to the floor and 3 chairs. A camera in the corner recorded everything. Claire was brought in a few minutes later. She was thinner than I'd ever seen her, cheekbones sharp, her once glossy hair pulled back in a plain ponytail. Orange jail-issued clothing replaced her designer outfits. Her wrists were cuffed in front of her. For a moment, seeing her like that, she looked like my little girl again, vulnerable, lost. Mom, she whispered when our eyes met. I stayed seated. Richard sat to my left, Ada Grant to my right. A guard stood by the door. There would be no hugging, no dramatic reunions. Claire, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. She sat down across from me, hands trembling slightly as the chain between her cuffs clinked against the metal table. She looked at Sophia, who was sitting in the corner, partially turned away. Claire's face crumpled. Sophia, baby, please look at me. Sophia didn't turn. I'm here because Grandma wanted to be here. That's the only reason. Claire flinched like she'd been slapped. Then she turned back to me. Mom, I am so sorry. I don't even know where to start. I know you hate me. I know you probably never want to see me again, but I need you to understand that I wasn't thinking clearly. I was desperate. Dennis, stop, I said, raising a hand. Before you say another word, you need to know something. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm not here to absolve you. I'm here for the truth. All of it. No more half-truths, No more tears used as weapons. If you can't do that, this meeting is over. She swallowed hard. For a moment, I saw something like anger flash in her eyes, the spoiled child who didn't like being told what to do. But it faded quickly, replaced by a weary resignation. "Fine," she said. "You want the truth?" I was drowning. The gambling started small. $100 here, 500 there. It felt exciting, like I had control over something for once. Dennis wasn't a good husband, Mom. You know that. You never liked him. He controlled everything. Our money, my time, who I could see. Gambling was the one thing that felt like mine. I'd expected excuses. I hadn't expected this level of bluntness. "When did it stop being fun?" I asked. She laughed bitterly. "When I realized I couldn't stop. When I was losing faster than I was winning. When I started lying about where the money was going. When just one more game turned into staying up until 3 in the morning, clicking refresh on those stupid online cards, praying for a miracle." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. By the time I admitted to myself that I had a problem, the debt was already over $50,000. Dennis found out when some guy named Tony showed up at his office asking questions. Dennis was furious, not because I was in trouble, but because I'd hidden it from him. "So your solution was to steal from me?" I asked. Her shoulders slumped. "At first, my solution was to ask you for help. I was going to tell you everything. I even came over that day with the intention of confessing. Do you remember? You were working on that proposal for the New York penthouse." I did remember. She'd sat in my kitchen, picking at a muffin, looking like she wanted to say something but never did. "But then Dennis came up with his own plan," she continued. "He'd already been looking for ways to get access to your money. He said if you helped me once, I'd just get into trouble again. He said we needed a permanent solution. He found Dr. Paulson, some sleazy psychiatrist who'd do anything for cash. They started talking about having you declared incompetent." "And you went along with it," I said. She nodded miserably. "I tried to tell myself it wasn't that bad, that you'd be in a nice facility, that you'd be taken care of, that you'd never even notice the money was gone." I know how insane that sounds now, but when you're desperate, your mind twists things. You start believing your own lies. Sophia finally spoke, not looking at her mother. "You were going to send Grandma to a psych ward because you didn't want to go to rehab." Claire flinched again. "I was going to go to rehab too. That was part of the plan. Once we had the money, Dennis said I could fix myself. But we needed the money first. We needed to make sure you couldn't change your will again, Mom." "What about the trust for Sophia?" I asked. "You knew about it. You saw the papers in my office." She looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know it was 2.8 million. I just knew you'd changed something. Dennis was the one obsessed with the exact numbers. He went through your files when you weren't home. He was the one who created the shell companies, who forged your signature. I approved it. I knew what he was doing. I didn't stop him." There it was, the truth I needed. Not that Dennis was innocent. He was clearly a driving force. But that Claire wasn't just some coerced puppet. She had agency. She had choices. And she had chosen wrong over and over. "Why involve Sophia?" I asked, my voice tight. "Why plan to take her out shopping so she wouldn't be home? Why drag her into this at all?" Her eyes finally met her daughter's. "Because I knew if you talked to her, she'd believe you. She always believes you. I couldn't risk her being there. I thought if I got you committed quickly, I could control the narrative. Tell her you'd had a breakdown, that it was for your own good." "You were going to make me think Grandma was crazy," Sophia said, incredulous. "You were going to stand there and lie to my face." Claire's face crumpled. "Yes, and I hate myself for that. Every second of every day since I was arrested, I have thought about what I almost did to both of you. I don't deserve forgiveness. I know that. But Dennis deserves more blame than I do." There it was, the pivot, the self-preservation, the subtle rebalancing of guilt. "Claire," I said slowly, "do you regret what you did because you hurt us, or because you got caught?" She stared at me, stunned. For a moment, I saw the fury again, the entitlement. Then her shoulders dropped. "Both," she whispered. "I regret hurting you. I regret scaring Sophia. And I regret getting caught because now I have to face what I am." "What are you?" I asked, holding her gaze. She let out a shuddering breath. "I'm an addict. I'm a liar. I'm a coward. And I'm the daughter of a woman who deserved so much better than what I did to her." For the first time, I believed her. Not enough to forget. Not enough to save her from consequences. But enough to feel something shift inside me. The raw, burning rage cooled just enough to make room for something else. Resolve. "I will support your decision to take a plea," I said. "I will tell the prosecutor that I don't oppose a reduced sentence if you cooperate fully and testify against Dennis and Dr. Paulson. Not for you, for me, for Sophia, for Richard's legacy. I want this finished. I want the truth on record." Tears streamed down Claire's face. "Does that mean you forgive me?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "Forgiveness is not part of this conversation. Forgiveness, if it ever comes, will be years from now, earned through consistent change. Right now, this is about accountability." The guard stepped forward, signaling that our time was up. Claire looked at Sophia one last time. "Sophia, honey, Sophia finally turned to her, eyes hard. "I hope you actually get help this time. Not just for court. For you. Because I'm not going to save you. Not ever again." They led Claire out of the room in handcuffs. I watched her go and felt something inside me settle. This was the point of no return. Whatever happened next, plea deals, sentences, public fallout, we were past the old dynamic where Claire's tears dictated my choices. Walking out of the courthouse into the cold January air, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The situation was still awful. My family was still broken. But the power balance had shifted. I was no longer the mother silently absorbing my daughter's chaos. I was a woman protecting herself and her granddaughter, standing in the truth without flinching. That was the real turning point. Not Claire's plea deal, not the new charges against Dennis and Dr. Paulson. It was the moment I chose myself, fully, unapologetically, for the first time in my life. The trial began on the last Monday in February, almost 10 weeks after that December afternoon, when Sophia had come running down from the attic. Dennis had refused all plea deals, insisted on his innocence, and demanded his day in court. His attorney was an expensive shark named Malcolm Reeves, who specialized in white-collar crime and had a reputation for shredding witnesses on the stand. I'd been dreading this day since the moment the trial date was set. Not because I was afraid of the truth coming out, I wasn't, but because I knew what it meant. I would have to sit in that courtroom and publicly recount every humiliating detail of how my own daughter and son-in-law had conspired to rob me. The press would be there. My friends would be there. People I'd done business with for 30 years would be watching me testify about forged documents and fake psychiatric evaluations. Claire had already taken her plea deal 2 weeks earlier. 3 years in a minimum security facility, eligible for parole after 18 months with good behavior. Part of her deal required her to testify against Dennis. I hadn't spoken to her since that meeting at the courthouse, though she'd sent me letters through her attorney. I hadn't opened them. I wasn't ready. Richard Chen met Sophia and me outside the courthouse that morning. The February air was bitterly cold, and snow threatened from heavy gray clouds overhead. Reporters were already gathering on the steps, cameras ready. "Remember," Richard said quietly as we approached the entrance, "you don't have to answer their questions. Just keep walking. Stay calm. This is going to be difficult, but you're prepared. You know the truth, and that's all that matters." A reporter shoved a microphone toward me. "Mrs. Hartwell, how does it feel knowing your daughter is testifying against her own husband? Do you have any sympathy for either of them?" I kept my eyes forward and my mouth shut. Sophia gripped my hand tightly as we pushed through the crowd and into the building. Security was tight. We passed through metal detectors, had our bags searched, and were finally escorted to a private room where witnesses waited. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd expected from watching legal dramas on television. Wood paneling, high ceilings, harsh fluorescent lighting. The jury box was filled with 12 people who would decide Dennis's fate, and in some ways, mine. They would hear every detail of my family's dysfunction, every mistake I'd made, every blind spot I'd had. Dennis sat at the defense table in a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His hair was perfectly styled, his posture confident. He looked more like a successful executive than a man facing 10 years in prison. When his eyes found mine across the courtroom, there was no remorse in them, only cold calculation. The prosecution called their witnesses systematically over the first 2 days. Detective Morrison testified about the forged documents and the investigation. The forensic accountant walked the jury through the shell companies Dennis had created and the $100,000 he'd stolen from my business. Dr. Paulson, now facing his own criminal charges, had agreed to testify in exchange for a lighter sentence. He admitted that Dennis had paid him $15,000 to create a fake psychiatric evaluation recommending my involuntary commitment. Mr. Thornton provided me with specific language to include Dr. O. Paulson testified, looking ashamed. He told me to emphasize paranoia, memory loss, and aggressive behavior. He said those were key to getting a court-ordered commitment. I never met Mrs. Hartwell. I never evaluated her. Everything in that report was fabricated. Watching him say those words out loud, watching the jury's faces register shock and disgust, I felt vindicated. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't me being paranoid or overdramatic. This was real, documented conspiracy. Then it was Claire's turn. She was brought in wearing prison-issued clothing, wrists cuffed. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow. When she took the stand and was sworn in, her voice was barely audible. ADA Melissa Grant walked her through the timeline. When the gambling started, when Dennis found out, when they began planning to access my assets. Ms. Thornton, can you describe the conversation where you and your husband first discussed obtaining power of attorney over your mother? Claire's voice shook. It was last October. I'd just gotten another threatening email from the gambling website about my debt. Dennis said we needed to think long-term. He said my mother was getting older and that it made sense for me to have legal control over her finances in case something happened. At first, I thought he meant asking her permission. But then, he said no, we needed to do it the other way. What did you understand the other way to mean? Without her consent, without her knowing. He said she'd never agree to it voluntarily because she didn't trust me with money. He was right about that. I'd already borrowed and lost so much. Claire looked directly at the jury. I knew it was wrong, I knew it was illegal, but I was desperate, and Dennis convinced me it was the only solution. Malcolm Reeves, Dennis's attorney, immediately objected. Your Honor, the witness is attempting to shift blame to my client for her own criminal decisions. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Patricia Kim, looked unmoved. Overruled. The witness is describing conversations relevant to the conspiracy charge. Continue, Ms. Grant. Claire went on to describe the creation of the forged power of attorney, the meetings with Dr. Paulson, the planning that went into December 20th. She described how Dennis had specifically chosen that date because he thought Sophia would be out of the house at a friend's sleepover. He said once we got my mother to sign the documents, or if she refused, once we got her committed to Fairview, we'd have full access within 24 hours. He'd already identified which assets to liquidate first: the business, the investment accounts, the life insurance policies. He had it all mapped out. And you agreed to this plan? Claire's face crumpled. Yes, I agreed. I helped. I'm not claiming I'm innocent. I'm guilty. But Dennis was the architect. He found the corrupt psychiatrist. He created the shell companies. He forged my mother's signature because his handwriting was better suited for it. I went along with everything, and I will never forgive myself for that. When Malcolm Reeves cross-examined her, he went for the throat immediately. Ms. Thornton, isn't it true that you're testifying against my client in exchange for a significantly reduced sentence? Yes. And isn't it also true that you have every incentive to exaggerate his role and minimize your own to make your deal look justified? Claire looked at him steadily. I'm testifying truthfully. I accepted my deal because I am guilty, but your client is more guilty. He masterminded this entire thing. You expect this jury to believe that a grown woman with a college education was simply manipulated into committing multiple felonies by her husband? No, Claire said quietly. I expect them to believe that I was an addict who made terrible choices, and that my husband exploited my addiction to serve his own greed. Both things are true. Reeves pressed her for another 20 minutes, trying to poke holes in her timeline, questioning why she hadn't just asked me for help, insinuating that she was actually the mastermind framing Dennis. But Claire held firm. Whatever else she was convincing on that stand. Then it was my turn. I was called on the third day of the trial. Walking to that witness stand felt like the longest journey of my life. Every eye in the courtroom was on me. The jury, the judge, the reporters in the back row. Dennis, watching me with that cold, calculating expression. I was sworn in and took my seat. Ada Grant smiled at me gently, the way you'd smile at someone you knew was about to relive trauma. Mrs. Hartwell, can you please tell the jury about your relationship with your daughter Claire and her husband Dennis Thornton? I took a breath and began. I told them about Claire's childhood, about my regrets over not being more present. I told them about Dennis, about the warning signs I'd dismissed because I wanted to believe the best of my family. I walked them through the suspicious loan requests, the attempted account access, the fake therapy sessions. When did you first realize something was seriously wrong? Grant asked. December 20th, when my granddaughter Sophia came down from the attic holding a folder of forged documents. My voice caught. Until that moment, I'd suspected problems, but I'd talked myself out of believing my daughter would actually try to harm me. That day, I couldn't deny it anymore. Grant had me identify the forged power of attorney, the fake psychiatric evaluation, the bank transfer forms. Each document was entered into evidence while the jury examined copies. I watched their faces register comprehension, disgust, sympathy. Mrs. Hartwell, if your granddaughter hadn't found those documents, what do you believe would have happened? Objection, Malcolm Reeves called out. Speculation. Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell's belief about the defendant's intentions is relevant to understanding the severity of the conspiracy, Grant argued. Judge Kim nodded. I'll allow it. Please answer the question, Mrs. Hartwell. I looked directly at the jury. I believe I would have been forcibly taken to Fairview Psychiatric Hospital the next morning based on that fake evaluation. Once there, I would have been medicated, isolated, and held while my daughter and Dennis drained my accounts and sold my assets. By the time anyone realized the evaluation was fraudulent, it might have been too late. I might have been trapped there for weeks or months while they destroyed everything my late husband and I built over 30 years. The courtroom was completely silent. Then it was Malcolm Reeves's turn to cross-examine me. I'd been warned this would be brutal. Defense attorneys like him specialized in making victims look paranoid, hysterical, or complicit in their own victimization. Mrs. Hartwell, he began smoothly, you've testified that you had a difficult relationship with your daughter. Would you say you were a good mother? I saw where he was going immediately. I was an imperfect mother who worked too much and wasn't present enough. I've acknowledged that. In fact, you sent your daughter to boarding school, didn't you? Yes, an excellent school that provided her opportunities I never had. Opportunities, he repeated, but not a mother's love and attention, not the presence she needed during her formative years. Objection, Grant said sharply. Relevance? Your Honor, I'm establishing the family dynamic that contributed to Ms. Thornton's emotional state and vulnerability, Reeves said. Judge Kim looked skeptical, but nodded. I'll allow it, but get to the point, Counselor. Reeves turned back to me. Mrs. Hartwell, when your daughter came to you for financial help multiple times over the past 3 years, you gave her money at first, correct? Yes. $70,000 over 3 years, according to your own testimony. Approximately, yes. But then you stopped. You cut her off. Didn't you? I stopped giving her money because I suspected she wasn't being honest about what she needed it for. So you abandoned her financially when she was clearly struggling, just as you'd abandoned her emotionally during her childhood. His voice was sharp, accusatory. I felt anger flare in my chest, but I kept my voice level. I didn't abandon anyone. I set boundaries with an adult woman who was lying to me. That's not abandonment. That's self-protection. Self-protection, he repeated, like the words tasted bitter. Is that also why you changed your will to exclude your only daughter from the bulk of your estate? To give millions to your teenage granddaughter instead? I didn't exclude Claire. I created a trust for Sophia to ensure she'd have financial security. Claire still inherited the house and other assets. But you didn't trust your daughter. You never trusted her. You judged her, controlled her, and ultimately cut her out of what she saw as her rightful inheritance. Isn't it possible, Mrs. Hartwell, that your daughter's desperation was partially caused by your own treatment of her? I stared at him. This was the defense's strategy. Make me the villain. Make Claire the wounded child pushed to extremes by a cold, controlling mother. My daughter made choices, I said clearly. She chose to gamble. She chose to lie. She chose to forge documents and plan my involuntary commitment. Those were her choices, not mine. I may not have been a perfect mother, but I didn't turn her into a criminal. She did that herself. Reeves pushed harder, trying to get me to admit I'd been paranoid, that maybe I'd misunderstood their intentions, that perhaps they genuinely believed I was becoming mentally incompetent. But I wouldn't budge. I'd lived through this. I knew what they'd planned. Finally, he switched tactics. Mrs. Hartwell, you're a wealthy woman. $4.2 million in assets, according to testimony. Isn't it true that you could have easily helped your daughter without even noticing the financial impact? I could have, if she'd been honest with me. If she'd admitted she had a gambling addiction and asked for help getting treatment. But she didn't do that. She chose deception and theft instead. So you're saying this was all about punishing her? Teaching her a lesson? No, I said firmly. This is about holding her accountable. There's a difference. After nearly 2 hours on the stand, Judge Kim finally dismissed me. I walked back to my seat on shaking legs, feeling wrung out and exhausted. Sophia squeezed my hand when I sat down beside her. You did great, Grandma, she whispered. You told the truth. The trial lasted 2 more days. Dennis ultimately decided not to testify in his own defense, which ADA Grant later told me was probably smart. He would have been destroyed on cross-examination. His attorney argued that Claire had manipulated Dennis, that he'd been trying to protect his troubled wife, that the evidence was circumstantial. But the jury didn't buy it. They deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on all counts: forgery, fraud, conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, attempted kidnapping related to the psychiatric commitment plan. The list went on. When the verdict was read, Dennis's face remained impassive, but I saw his hands clench into fists under the table. His attorney immediately announced plans to appeal. Judge Kim set sentencing for 3 weeks later. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. It wasn't joy exactly. There was too much pain, too much loss for joy. But it was relief, vindication. The truth had been heard and believed. Sophia and I stood on the courthouse steps while reporters shouted questions. This time, I didn't ignore them. I stopped, looked directly at the cameras, and spoke. Today, Justice was served. My family is broken, and that pain will stay with me for the rest of my life. But I want other families to know that you don't have to accept abuse, manipulation, or theft from anyone, even your own children. You have the right to protect yourself. You have the right to set boundaries, and you have the right to hold people accountable no matter how much you love them. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I was 56 years old, standing in the cold February wind, and I had just reclaimed my power in front of the whole world. That night, Sophia and I ordered Chinese food and ate it in my living room, the same room where this nightmare had begun 10 weeks earlier. We didn't talk about the trial. We didn't talk about Claire or Dennis or what came next. We just ate lo mein and watched a comedy special and laughed at stupid jokes until our sides hurt. For the first time since December, I felt like maybe, eventually, we'd actually be okay. Dennis was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. No parole eligibility for at least 5. Dr. Paulson lost his medical license and received 2 years for his role in the conspiracy. Claire served 14 months before being released on parole with strict conditions: mandatory addiction counseling, community service, and 0 contact with me or Sophia unless we initiated it. That was 18 months ago. Today is June 15th, and I'm sitting on my back patio watching Sophia practice her driving in the circular driveway. She's 16 now, got her license last month, and drives with the careful precision of someone who takes rules seriously. She's always been like that. Careful. Thoughtful. The girl who saved my life. The cherry trees Richard and I planted 20 years ago are in full bloom, their white petals drifting across the lawn like snow. It's beautiful, peaceful, the kind of moment I never thought I'd experience again after that December afternoon when my world fell apart. My phone buzzes. A text from Richard Chen. Trust fund paperwork is finalized. Sophia's college accounts are fully secured and untouchable by anyone but her when she turns 25. Sleep well, Evelyn. I smile and text back a thank you. Richard has been more than my attorney through all of this. He's been my anchor, my voice of reason when grief and anger threaten to drown me. He and his wife Janet have had Sophia and me over for dinner at least once a month, treating us like family. The business is thriving. After everything became public, I thought my reputation would be destroyed. I thought clients would see me as the woman who couldn't even manage her own family, so how could she manage their interior design projects? But the opposite happened. People rallied around me, offered support, recommended me to friends. My revenue this year is projected to hit $3.2 million, the highest it's ever been. I've hired a new general manager, a brilliant woman named Patricia who handles operations while I focus on client relationships and creative direction. I'm working less than I did before Richard died, but more effectively. I'm present in a way I never was when Claire was growing up. That guilt still sits with me some days, heavy and sharp, but I've learned to carry it without letting it dictate my choices. Sophia parks the car and walks over to where I'm sitting. She's grown 3 inches in the last year and a half, now almost as tall as me. Her blonde hair is longer, pulled back in a French braid I taught her to do. She's wearing a college prep program t-shirt from Yale, where she spent last week touring campus. "How'd I do?" she asks, dropping into the chair beside me. "Perfect as always. You're a better driver than I was at 16. She grins. "That's because you actually taught me, instead of just throwing keys at me and saying, 'Figure it out.'" We laugh. It's a running joke between us, the ways I'm trying to be different with her than I was with Claire. More present, more patient, more willing to actually show up. "Grandma, there's something I need to tell you," Sophia says, her tone shifting. "Mom sent me a letter. It came to the P.O. box yesterday." My chest tightens. Claire isn't supposed to contact Sophia directly. That was part of her parole conditions. But Sophia had opened a P.O. box 6 months ago, specifically so Claire could write if she wanted to, without violating the technical terms of the restraining order. It was Sophia's decision, one I didn't fight even though it scared me. "What did it say?" Sophia pulls a folded piece of paper from her pocket. Do you want to read it, or should I just tell you? Tell me, if you want to. She unfolds it, scanning the contents. She's been clean for 8 months. No gambling at all. She's working at a rehab center, helping other addicts. She says she's in therapy 3 times a week. She asked if maybe someday I might be willing to meet her for coffee. Supervised. Just to talk. My first instinct is to say no, to protect Sophia from more potential hurt. But I catch myself. Sophia is 16, not 6. She's capable of making this decision. What do you want to do? I ask carefully. She's quiet for a long moment, staring out at the cherry trees. I don't know. Part of me wants to see if she's really changed, if she's really getting better, but another part of me is scared that it's all fake, that she'll hurt me again. Both of those feelings are valid, I say. You don't have to decide right now. You don't have to decide at all if you're not ready. Have you thought about seeing her? Sophia asks, turning to look at me. Like, ever? I have. More than I want to admit. Late at night when I can't sleep, I think about Claire as a baby, as a little girl, as the daughter I failed in some ways and who failed me catastrophically in others. I think about forgiveness and whether it's something I owe her or something I owe myself, or neither. I have thought about it, I admit. I'm not ready yet. Maybe I never will be, but I don't rule it out entirely. That's fair, Sophia says. She folds the letter and tucks it back in her pocket. I think I might write her back, not to say yes to coffee, but just to tell her I got her letter, that I'm glad she's doing better. Is that okay? Sweetheart, you don't need my permission to communicate with your mother. I trust your judgment. She smiles, relieved. Thanks, Grandma. We sit in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. This is what healing looks like, I think. Not dramatic confrontations or tearful reunions. Just quiet moments in a garden, making space for complicated feelings, learning to exist in the aftermath. I got my acceptance letter from the summer writing program at Columbia, Sophia says suddenly, changing the subject. The one I applied to back in March. Oh my God, that's wonderful. I pull her into a hug. When do you start? July 7th. It's 6 weeks. I'll be living in the dorms, taking workshops with actual published authors. Grandma, it's like a dream. Watching her face light up with excitement reminds me why I fought so hard. This girl, this brilliant, brave, kind human being, deserved protection. Deserved a future not shadowed by her parents' dysfunction. The trust fund is secure. Her college education is fully funded. When she turns 25, she'll have financial independence that no one can take from her. Your grandfather would be so proud of you, I say, my voice thick with emotion. I wish he could see the person you're becoming. I think he can, Sophia says softly. And I think he'd be proud of you too, for surviving all of this, for protecting us. Us, she said us. Because despite everything, Sophia sees herself and me as a unit, a team, a family that chose each other when biology failed us. My phone rings, unknown number. I almost decline it, but something makes me answer. Hello? Mrs. Hartwell, this is Susan Brennan from the Connecticut Coalition Against Elder Abuse. I'm reaching out because we've been following your case in the news. We're organizing a symposium this fall about financial exploitation within families, and we'd like to invite you to speak on a panel. Share your story, help other people recognize the warning signs. I'm surprised. You want me to speak publicly about what happened? Only if you're comfortable, Susan says quickly. We know it's a painful topic, but your case was so well documented, and your willingness to pursue justice has already inspired other victims to come forward. We think your voice could make a real difference. I look at Sophia, who's watching me curiously. I think about sitting in that courtroom, giving my testimony, refusing to hide in shame. I think about standing on those courthouse steps and speaking to the cameras. I think about the messages I received afterward from other women dealing with similar situations, thanking me for being brave. I'd be honored to speak, I hear myself say. Send me the details. When I hang up, Sophia is grinning. You're going to be famous, Grandma? Like a real advocate. I don't know about famous, but if my nightmare can help someone else avoid the same thing, then maybe it wasn't completely without purpose. The sun is setting now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Sophia and I sit together on the patio, and I feel something I haven't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the naive hope of someone who hasn't been hurt, but the hard-earned hope of someone who's survived and chosen to keep going anyway. Claire is in recovery. Dennis is in prison. Dr. Paulson lost everything he built on lies. Justice was served, as much as justice can ever truly be served in situations like this. But more importantly, Sophia is thriving. My business is stronger than ever. And I've learned the difference between being a good mother and being a doormat. Forgiveness may come someday, or it may not. I've made peace with either possibility. What matters is that I chose myself when it mattered most. I chose truth over comfortable lies. I chose protection over blind loyalty. And in doing so, I saved not just my assets, but my life. Grandma, Sophia says, breaking the silence. Thank you. For what, sweetheart? For believing me. When I ran down from that attic, terrified and probably not making much sense, you believed me. You trusted me. You chose me. Not everyone would have done that. I take her hand and squeeze it. You saved us both that day. Don't ever forget that. As darkness falls over Greenwich and the first stars appear in the summer sky, I realize this is where my story actually begins. Not with the betrayal, not with the trial, not even with the survival, but here, in the quiet after the storm, learning to build something new from the pieces that remained. I'm 57 years old. My daughter is in prison. My family is broken in ways that may never fully heal. But I'm alive, I'm strong, and I'm surrounded by people who genuinely love me. Sophia, Richard Chen and his wife, my sister Margaret, friends who showed up when things got ugly. This is enough. More than enough. This is everything.